Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Kreft's Couch Pod. And today we're going to talk about judgment. And it is a doozy. There is just so much in this topic that we could go into, and I'm going to attempt to break it down for you. So let's just dive right in. Okay. What is judgment, first of all? Judgment is anything we've decided is good or bad or right or wrong. Now, we basically have totally been programmed and groomed into this reality to function from judgment, to function from what's right, to not choose what's wrong, and to pretty much dictate our entire lives based on judgment. The crazy thing is, nature does not function from judgment. It just creates. It just is. So, what is this construct that we humans have created? And is it creating the greatest reality possible? Or is there something else we could choose? These are the thoughts that go on in my head. And I was really getting that I have dynamically functioned from judgment for a really long time. And everything I've chosen was really dictated on trying to get it right. I mean, from the years in ballet to, having tons of feedback, if you will, critiques about changing your technique and making sure your body was a certain way and presenting a certain way and doing the movements right, et cetera, all based on getting it right. So that was huge in kind of my childhood programming. And then as I was looking back, even recognizing the need to always prove rightness through academia or scholastically, in the sense of I was valedictorian in high school, or needing to get higher degrees and continued certifications and just everything, that I got to a point where I was recognizing that what's another degree going to create? What's another certification? It was almost like this void that couldn't be filled. And I was starting to perceive that I was just not choosing. I was seeking to have things outside of me prove that, look, I'm right. I'm good enough. I've done all these things. Yet it didn't seem to make a difference. So I was like, okay, well, what truly is this creating? Because as I was starting to show up on social and create the whole, Kreft's Couch thing, I was recognizing, wow, okay, there's a lot of folks that function from judgment on here, and they end up in the comments. And it is challenging to navigate. It can be really challenging to navigate if you make judgment true and real. And from where I was functioning, for a really long time was, okay, well, someone said this is wrong. I must be wrong. How did I say this wrong? Well, where can I make it right? And just showing up so nervously, timidly, and watering down everything I was saying to not offend, to not piss someone off, right? And going into all of that to the point that I was just at effect. I was the one that was getting swept up in the wind and not able to stand strong in my message. And if I had gotten this awareness sooner, then I likely maybe wouldn't have been, kind of crumbled under all that in the early days of social media. Yet, through different experiences, I'm having these times where there's almost like windows of possibilities where I don't make the judgment real on either side. It just is. It's just an interesting point of view. Because when you can start to get that judgment isn't real, It's a man-made construct that we come up with, right? And you can simply look at it from the fact that none of us can really agree on truly what's right or wrong. If it's not real, for what purpose do we become totally disempowered by it, right? Like we're totally out of effect of it. And if something says we're doing something wrong, then, we kind of just lose ourselves, wash away. And what I was recognizing is, okay, well, what is then the purpose of judgment? What does judgment actually create? It's creating a lot of people that are really nervous to show up as themselves for fear of the judgment from others. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's often the first thing I hear is, well, what are people going to say if I post this? Or I'm afraid of what my family will think. I'm afraid of what my friends will think. And going into all this fear about, again, something that we've made so real that isn't. And I was recognizing how people use judgment to control you. If you just look at the functionality of judgment, what does it create? Someone stands on one side and says, I'm right, you're wrong, you need to change. And then the other person is like, oh, well, okay, let me bend and mutilate and change so I can show up to fit whatever this person's decided, right? So they are controlling us by their judgment. And yet, what is the judgment being projected from but someone who is already feeling discomfort in their own skin, of refusal to choose, and a real lack of awareness of presence of who they're being? I had an experience lately that really made this clear for me. And I had someone in one of my older group programs. So it had been done for quite a while now. And they were pretty engaged. They were engaged in the calls, and, we had some great interactions, and I came to the conclusion of like, oh, I like this person. I connected with them. It's all gravy. Well, this group program also involved a course and whatnot. And maybe like six months later, they email me about kind of a micro issue they were having with the course. And I could perceive in their world, oh, this is definitely a trauma response, right? They're not fully present, and it seems really disproportionate to kind of how the course is laid out. And so I was really aware of that right away, although I could already tell that they were functioning from a lot of wrongness and judgment at me, but seeking to almost keep the lid on the pot. Like the pot's boiling over, but there's like the lid's trying to be held down. And so that was my initial awareness, right? I've done a lot of this work now. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I'm aware they're functioning from a trauma response. I get that. I can kind of separate it, not personalize it. So I respond and email back and say, and kind of explain, well, this is typically kind of how courses are, kind of give them psychoeducation about that, awareness, and kind of review everything that, went on during our time together. And then I asked them, hey, Truth, is this really about the course or something else? Because to me, it was so clear that it was something separate, yet the energy was taken and directed like a sphere right at me. And I thought at the time that would have kind of heightened the awareness, that would have kind of woken them up to some presence based on my previous interactions with them. And instead, I got a very different response, which was, well, this was born out of anger, and I'm really frustrated, and I didn't have the money for this course, and all these sorts of things that kind of didn't even make sense to what the initial frustration was. And, they're saying like, if this one minor tiny tweak was made, then this would be a non-issue. And so I could not, in good conscience, they said, not give you this feedback. And for a moment, I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting. And I still had this space of awareness until I fell under the judgment spell. I fell under it and got into my head about it. So I got out of space, I got out of presence, and I started to fall into what judgment does, which is control you. I went into like, oh, what's wrong here? What did I choose wrong? How could I have done this? And just gone into all this doubt about it. Yet my initial clarity on it was quite different. It was not that. And so I ping my coach, as one does when you go into these things, to just kind of look at the energy of it. And she had me get out of my head and drop into my body and just get present with what the person was choosing and what they were really desiring. And I just had so much awareness all at once of, wow, where they're functioning from. Now, because I was going into the judgment of I liked them, we had good interactions, I didn't expect this to happen. Now, if I was more present in question, I would have been more aware, or this wouldn't have caught me off guard. Because when we are in the conclusion of judgment, good too, not just bad, good or bad, then we block our awareness. We block what we could know. And what I was aware of was that this person, although engaged in the calls, didn't do a ton on all the course materials, and also really struggled with multiple defaulted payments. And, they just struggled to get it paid off. And so that's all just interesting. It's just interesting. And it's information. Information that, again, when you like someone, you will block from your awareness, right? So not in the sense of needing to make it really significant and real, just more, this was not, it didn't kind of ping me as something to be aware of. And so going back to, talking with my own coach, when I dropped into my body, I was like, wow, what are they choosing? And she asked me, where are they functioning from? Like encouraging me to get in touch with what I know, not with what someone is saying, but what are they choosing? What are they being? And it became really clear as we looked at the energy, asked questions about it. Wow, they're not choosing to function from presence, and they are not actually saying what's congruent with the energy. The person was functioning from, a lot of emotion, and then deciding, well, what would it take to, kind of get my money back in this situation? Because we could tell it was like making me wrong for this really micro situation. So as I got aware of that and where they're functioning from and seeing it happen in real time, where I had the space and then kind of defaulted into the old way of crumbling under the judgment, I was like, wow, okay, this judgment thing is really a big thing for folks. I mean, it really can stop us and put us in a completely different reality. Because on one hand, I started by being really present and in myself and aware of where the person was functioning from, and then almost, like I said, kind of fell into the spell of it, fell into being controlled by it. So once I got back out of that, I looked at my choices in what would create greater here. And I also recognized that I needed a little space, a little time from the last email to kind of allow that awareness to clarify, because if we're too much in an emotional reactionary state, we're not going to have access to our awareness. And when I'm talking about awareness, I mean that kind of whisper of information that happens kind of immediately when you tune into something, when you ask a question and you're looking for more information. That's awareness. And awareness doesn't have the charge that judgment has. That's like the easiest way to differentiate the two. Because when people are seeking to get out of judgment, it doesn't mean go put your head in the sand. It doesn't mean walk down a dark alleyway that tends to be unsafe and maybe there's been robberies there before, it doesn't mean do that. And it's like, oh, I'm out of judgment, so I'm going to walk down this dark alleyway. No, that's not what it means. It means have awareness. Have awareness. Oh, okay, what will it create if I walk down this dark alleyway? Ooh, my body contracted. I get that I don't want to put myself in that scenario, right? Not right or wrong, good or bad, more just it might not create what I want to have my life to be, which is ease and safety. So that's the difference there, is when judgment kind of takes hold of you, where you almost get wrapped up in the swelling of it. It's like a spell. You can't see clearly. That's judgment. Awareness can still have aspects of preferences and, not wanting to walk down a dark alleyway and get mugged. That's not what I want, how I want to live my life. That's awareness. I can have the awareness of that. It just is, right? It doesn't have control over me. So as I got clearer, kind of where this person was functioning from, I was like, okay, what are my choices here? And initially, there was like the defense of I'm not wrong. And still when I was under a bit of the judgmental spell, I'm not wrong. And, really trying to get them to see my point of view. That was in my head. I didn't respond to that because I was like, this is not going to create greater. I just get that like my head needs to work through some of this. And as I got out of that space, I recognized what would create greater was to just no longer have them in my world or have them in my container. So it was really irrelevant whether I thought they were right or wrong or I was right or wrong. It was what's going to create greater here. And what's going to create greater and more ease for me is to just no longer have them inside these spaces. And so when I recognized that, it was like, okay, well, what is going to create ease in allowing them to move along and go maybe find a better fit or be in a different space? So the awareness was, okay, it looks like an apology, refunding their money and allowing them to no longer be in containers. Now, when I shared this with some of my one of my entrepreneurial groups, some of them were a little confused, like, wait, you apologize? Like you didn't do anything wrong, and kind of going into that. And what I was explaining to them was when we are present with what someone is choosing, we can be very intentional about how we respond. Intentional in the sense of I'm looking to create something, not a default of people pleasing. Because initially, I sensed they were a little confused and thinking I was choosing that. I was like, people pleasing is different. People pleasing is when we just kind of default into needing to make the other person feel more comfortable because I'm uncomfortable. How do I make them feel more comfortable? For me, with this response, it was, what is the result I'm desiring to get? And what is the easiest way to get there? And what would I have to choose? And if I had decided that apologizing was not warranted or not what I should choose, then that wouldn't be a possibility available to me. So even with this, when I can get out of the right and wrongness of, let's say, even an apology for that situation, if I didn't make it right or wrong, if I had an interesting point of view about it, it was a possibility to me. And it was like, oh, that's interesting. Wow, okay, that actually feels light to choose. So what will that create if I write that? How much ease can I have with that? And if I were willing to be the wrong one here, what would I choose? Because I can get where there's just so much resistance for us to being wrong. And I just love the quote from Gary Douglas. He says, do you want to be right or do you want to be free? And wow, and he's a creator of Access Consciousness, and I've just found so much clarity in that, because it's like we can constantly fight for wanting to be right, and yet what is that creating? Because the judgment is activating our nervous system every single time. It's activating for us to go into a fight or flight stance. And it's like, if our bodies are letting us know that judgment is so hard on them, again, for what purpose are we choosing this? I mean, it's just something we have simply done because we've like all grown up this way, and the bulk of the reality functions from this. So it's like we just kind of default to it. Yet, what else is possible, truly? What else could we choose? And if we start to ask questions from a non-judgmental place, then what would that create? Because ultimately, I just got so much awareness lately and clarity on truly what my mission is, at least at this time, at least at this season, at this time. And I was getting it with this judgment stuff of, wow, okay, I am here to catalyze choice in others, to catalyze people's creations, to catalyze people stepping into themselves and fully embodying that. Because that is what we require. The folks that are nervous or scared to put themselves out there often have amazing gifts to offer, and that will create a completely different world. So if my message or information can catalyze that, wow, I wonder what that would create. Until next time.